Good morning, everyone. This is Jeffy Kennedy, author of Epic Fantasy Romance, and I'm here with my first cup of coffee. Oh, some mornings it just tastes, it's everything, right? Ah, today is Monday, November 18th, and I guess I don't have anything more to say about it than that. I had a good weekend. I want to tell you all a story about men. So, my male listeners out there, I think actually you will be interested in this. I'm very interested by some of the men who are taking the lead on social media to talk about the behavior of other men. Because one of the things we talk about a whole lot is um, that men will recognize that another man is behaving badly, but will not call him out. And so there are some men who are taking the lead on this, saying, we need to put our money where our mouths are. And if we think that this is bad behavior, we need to call it out because silence is condoning, and a lot of people don't want that to be the truth, but it is. I also will catch you up on what I'm doing writing wise, since it's ostensibly still a writing podcast. Oh, who are we kidding? I've never stuck to topic, which is why we have the cats in New Mexico weather tag for the podcast. So I'll just launch in and tell this story, I guess. When I was in college, I belonged to a peer counseling organization called Uncle Joe's. And we had this little counseling office that was open from like 10 to 1 every night. And I joined the organization. It was run under the auspices of the Student Counseling Center. I joined as a sophomore, and we had to do intensive counseling training. It was, gosh, at the time it seemed like everything in the whole world. It was 8 hours on a Saturday for like 6 weeks or 8 weeks. It was a lot. And exhausting. They were long days, and we did a lot of practice. We called them interactions. So we learned a lot of stuff, and we learned, like active listening, and we learned the hockey stick model of counseling, and it was a really useful thing. And in my senior year, I was head of it. I think, director was my title, which is relevant. So anyway, I believed in it very much, and I learned a lot. Uh, I think it taught me a great deal about human nature and about how people process or don't process emotions. And yeah, it's one of the interesting things about being a writer is that so many of the things that you do along the way um, feed into your training as a writer that you don't know are doing that. And I recall I had a professor who was giving out that advice to students. I've heard several people give that advice, especially to young writers, like, should I go be in an MFA program? How do I learn to write? How do I learn to do things? And in many ways, the very best advice is that you need to learn to be a human being. You need to have a breadth of experience. If all you do is read books and write books and go to an MFA program where other people have only read books and written books or written books, and I can't talk apparently, then you don't have much to write about. That's always the part that gets left out, right? It's like, I don't believe in the write what you know, although there is a core of truth to that piece of advice. Uh, the It should be, instead of write what you know, it should be like maybe write what you are. I like that. Write what you are. fact, I'm going to write that down. Because the point is not that you have to have actual experience with a thing to write about it, but it does need to come from inside. It needs to come from your core self, from your core beliefs. Um, and I won't rant anymore, but like on Friday, I did my rant about the nature of good and evil and what I believe in. And that comes through in my books. I mean, I absolutely believe it comes through in my books. Um, the things that are forgivable and what is reprehensible. Uh, and those are things that I live by as well. I'm very much a believer in having integrity in the sense of being consistent throughout everything. What I write, what I think, how I behave, how I act, how I vote, all of these things for me are part of having a core integrity. They should all be the same thing, not um, not something I pick and choose for different circumstances. I think the people that we think of as being hypocritical are the people who change up how they behave and talk and even think depending upon their company or their circumstances. So, I did have a point there. Oh, yeah, write what you are. You don't have to know about a thing. And certainly, if you're writing things like murder mysteries, you don't want to go out and perform murders. You don't have to have done a thing to write about it, but you do have to grok it, for lack of a better word. Apparently, not everybody knows that word, grok, grok, which means to have like a visceral understanding. So, write what you are. And so I think having experiences like that, like the peer counseling, helped build who I am and help build my understanding of human nature. But I did promise a story here. So there was this guy who was one of the counselors, and I believe he had started my junior year and had qualified through the training and was an active counselor my senior year when I was director. That was why it was relevant, because there was a problem that I had to deal with. And we'll call this guy Mike. He was from another country, and from a country notorious for its misogynistic views of women, like very strong rape culture in that country today. And this was in the 80s, and he was, a very intelligent, mild-mannered, kind person who was, wanting to be a peer counselor. And so none of that was ever a problem. I even briefly dated him. So by that, I want to say, I think I have pretty good taste in people. And yeah, I did briefly date him. There was never much to it, but yeah. He did not present as a bad person. Let's put it that way. He did not present as a predatory kind of guy. But that's one of the things we have to talk about, is that sometimes the predatory men are very good at not presenting as predatory men. And so it came out after a while that during interactions with female students, that he had been somehow getting like all the ones who were going through bad breakups. And so he would do the interaction the way that, we had prescribed, the way we had all trained. There were always two people on duty too, but the interaction would be one-on-one. Someone would stay out in the outer office and someone would, be back with the client in the back office. And so he, don't worry, there's no essay. Don't worry about that. But he would then hit on them. He would, go through the interaction, help them talk through like the trouble with the boyfriend or the breakup with the boyfriend. And then he would then present himself as an alternative. And it happened more than once. And we got complaints about it and we had to deal with it. We ended up having to kick him out of the organization, right? Because it was unethical behavior. And how often do we hear about this kind of thing where, um, you know, a female client ends up having an affair with her counselor or psychiatrist or what have you. It's an emotionally intimate setting. There are reasons for it that the real mental health professionals could explain to you. They talk about transference, but the thing is that the counselor, the person giving the counseling, has an ethical responsibility to not become romantically involved with their client. It is incumbent on them not to go for that, right? Not to tap that. And so I had been thinking about this guy, Mike, not his real name, who was acted kind of bewildered that this was, we had to sit down and talk to him, and he acted bewildered. He's like, why, I would be a better boyfriend for them. Why couldn't I do this? And it was it's an interesting circumstance. And, now we throw around the term gaslighting maybe a little too freely, because in some ways, I think it can be difficult to tell if the person doing this is dissembling so well that they are convincing that, like you're thinking, well, maybe he really didn't understand that this was not the right thing to do. It's a different culture and, like maybe he just didn't get it. But then there is a flip side to this kind of personality where they are very, very good at making it seem that way. And that this is their cover, that they, when confronted with wrongdoing, that they do the whole, I didn't know it was wrong. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to eat those cookies, right? Kids start doing it when they're very, very young. I was getting a cookie for you from the cookie jar, right? It's sort of embedded in our monkey nature, right? I wasn't stealing the bananas. I was moving them to a safe location. And it is the invidious nature of lying, in that some people are very, very good at lying. And it's difficult to tell if they know it or not, because the very best liars make it seem like it's not a lie, right? And people who are wedded to being honest have a hard time believing that someone could be dishonest. So, anyway, I was thinking about Mike recently with a lot of the discussions that have been going on, especially with some of these trolls emboldened post-election, saying horrible things to women on the internet, and acting like they feel like it's just okay. And they'll be like, well, I'm just asking a question, and reader, they're not just asking a question. They are trolling, and it's perfectly fine to call them on that. Or to block. Blocking is really easy, and there's no reason why you can't do it. So I don't know. Maybe I had more of a point to that story originally, but I wanted to share it. I think it's worth considering these stories. And also, the whole thing of us living in interesting times. We've been living in interesting times for a while now. Yeah, enough said on that. So, I had a good weekend. I had a very productive weekend, got a lot of business things handled. I think I'm feeling like I'm finally getting over the hump of handling a lot of the financial and business things. And had a great yoga class on Saturday morning, and the lovely Megan Mulry went with me, so that made me happy. And it was fun to catch up with her. She's on a really great trajectory, and so I liked hearing everything she had to say. Um, yeah, and so the book is coming along. As I mentioned, I spent last week revising from the beginning. I did not get very far. My typical revision rate is 32 pages a day, and last week I made it through 31 pages total. But I'm okay with it. I knew that the beginning was going to be particularly slow. And one thing about my 32 pages a day is that it is an average. There are like some sections, well, I'll get through like 75 pages or even 100 pages sometimes if I'm really on a roll, depending on how much work it needs. And I did need to adjust quite a few things from the beginning. I cut chapter 2, wrote a new chapter 2. I'm moving a few things forward. I was meeting with some writer friends last night, and they were asking how it was going. And I think I mentioned on here already that I stopped uh, writing a few chapters shy of the end. And they said, well, do you know how it's going to end yet? Since I very famously never know how my books are going to end. And I'm like, I don't. I only know where one person's going to be here and one person's going to be there, and I don't know which one's going to do which. And I had the same conversation with Megan on Saturday morning, and she said, well, that's good that you don't know, because she said that means that the reader won't know, um, which I think is a very good point. I don't do this to torment you readers. I really don't. So I hope it helps to know that I am in the same boat that you are. I'm like, oh, what are they going to decide? And people were offering me advice. They're like, well, maybe it should be, the one who feels this way. And I said, you know what? I think it's just going to be up to them. Once I get there, I'm going to see what the characters decide to do. They still have an emotional arc to finish. So we'll see.